We are live. I want to first ask who is here watching the live stream from the Steak and Butter Gang from SPG. Please drop that in the live chat. Hello. Nice to see you all. And if you're watching this, I would also love to know where you all are located. Hi, Effie from Kansas. Hi, Tracy from Colorado. So today we have a very special treat. We're going to talk about energy. Why do so many people who go carnivore still struggle with their energy levels? And we're going to have a very special guest who you guys love very much. He's part of the Steak and Butter Gang team, Dr. Phil Smith, retired, but the family physician in SPG for us. He's going to come on and he's going to talk all about energy, help you troubleshoot. He has slides and a fascinating N=1 experiment that he will be sharing. So without further ado, let's bring on Phil. Welcome.
Hey, Bella. How are you doing tonight?
Great.
And welcome everybody. So I was thinking a lot about energy this week, and I really wanted to talk about energy because so many people have trouble with fatigue, energy, and they think drinking coffee is the answer. And, the first thing they reach to is the caffeine and the stimulants. And I want to really tonight give people a deep dive into the world of mitochondria. And as someone who has a degree in physiology, I'm always fascinated with all the hormonal healing that people have to do when they come to us, and they have all these conditions and challenges in their life, and they think it's only due to being overweight or having their thyroid out of whack. But a lot of it is just due to the stress we put on ourselves from life. And when we look at what I call the macro physiology level, we talk about hormones like too much insulin, which is the hallmark of insulin resistance, or a mess up of your thyroid. So your thyroid hormones aren't appropriate, or your ghrelin and leptin that control your hunger and your satiety are messed up. We can mess up all these hormones, but what a lot of people don't understand is how we take these concepts and move them from the body standpoint all the way down to the actual cell and the cells of our body, our liver cells, our muscle cells, our heart cells, our brain cells. And tonight, I want to spend about 10-15 minutes talking about mitochondria. And I could probably talk for 8 hours about that. So what I'm going to try to do in about 14 minutes is give you a primer on mitochondria and explain why they are the key to all this other stuff that has to go on, and is the intracellular process that relates to getting your body figured out and getting it healthy again. And then I'm going to share an N=1 experiment that I've been doing these last 17 days, my 2026 N=1 experiment, to prove where I am, having had insulin resistance in the past, and how I have resolved it and actually proven that I've got it in pretty good check at this point and in good control. So I hope this is interesting. I hope we'll have a lot of questions. And I'm hoping tonight that we can keep our questions around insulin resistance, because we'll talk afterwards. We're launching our insulin resistant intensive, and we want to talk a little bit about that. So we just opened that up today, and we'll share a little bit about that. And we have Laura, Coach Laura, in backstage, and she's going to be joining us when I get done talking about mitochondria. So with no further ado, Lindy's going to bring up my slide, and hopefully we're seeing what a mitochondria is. And these slides were all made with AI, so I didn't go out and dissect anyone's mitochondria. So no mitochondria were hurt in the filming of this experience tonight. But it's important. You may not think it's important to understand mitochondria, but they are the powerhouse of our cells, and all the energy that every cell in our body uses to function literally comes from this little part of every cell of your body and it is what supplies the energy that fuels our very, very existence. So without mitochondria, you would not be here. And the interesting thing about the mitochondria, you can't see them with the naked eye. You can't see them with a scientific microscope. You have to go all the way down to a scanning electron microscope to even see them because they're smaller than the cells themselves and they're inside the cell. So let's dig into this a little bit and I'll see if I can advance these slides. I've never done this on this platform, so have some patience with me. Okay.
Yeah, Phil, right now we do not see the slide moving forward.
Yeah,
It's still the same slide.
and I, for some reason, it doesn't want to move forward for me. So
No worries.
let's figure this out. So much for technology, right?
Yeah, take your time. If you want to give the slides to Lindy, you could do that, and we could do questions in the meantime.
Yeah. So let me give them to Lindy, and she can do that. So I'm gonna let's just stop the sharing for a second. Lindy.
Yep, we're good. Stopped.
And I will drop them where Lindy can pull them up. And just be patient with me, everyone.
Yep, no problem. I'll remove Phil while he takes care of that. And let me just hang out with everyone who made it here. Welcome to the live. It's so nice to see so many of you guys from SBG. I see all of your comments. Let's actually talk about coffee because for me and from what I have seen with a lot of our members in the Steak and Butter Gang, energy can absolutely be affected when we drink coffee on an empty stomach, when we are fasted, and then we do an early morning workout and we don't even eat breakfast. So, who here is drinking coffee? Who here is not drinking coffee? Please put that in the chat box and we will talk in depth about how coffee affects your energy as well with Dr. Phil soon. Phil, you just holler whenever you're ready. Okay, I'm just going to hang out with everyone in here. Melanie says, I still love coffee. Yes, I am 5'10", Natalie. I'm looking at your comments. No problem. Hi, Pam. Hi, Corby. Would love to hear more about the impact of carnivore on type 1 diabetes. No problem. I start that. Anyone with questions, start with a capital Q and we star them and save them for when we do the Q&A portion of this live stream. A lot of you guys drink coffee. Yes, coffee is totally fine. If you love the taste of it, it's totally fine on a carnivore diet. Okay. I still drink coffee to this day. I've also played around with cutting out the coffee as a carnivore, and I personally didn't feel any magical, amazing benefits or changes. Nice. Tracy says, I'm getting ready to wean off coffee as I wean onto the Lion diet. Good luck. Keep us posted. Hi, Phil. Are you ready for questions?
I believe we're ready to get back to my presentation. How's that sound?
Oh, sure. Let's give Lindy some time because I don't see the slides up just yet. So let's do this one from Jen. Can a type 1 diabetic? Yeah. So Jen says, can a type 1 diabetic have insulin resistance? I'm 35, type 1 diabetic, and I have no weight issues.
Yeah. So type 1 diabetes is not an insulin resistance issue. It's an insulin depletion issue. You don't make insulin. So you have to be able to make insulin for your insulin to not work anymore. So when we're talking about insulin resistance in diabetics, we're always talking about either type 2 or what you theoretically call type 3 diabetics, which are type 2 diabetics that have dementia. So if you're a type 1 diabetic, it's a different disease process. Your body no longer makes insulin, And therefore, because you have no naturally occurring insulin, you're only taking insulin that you're giving yourself externally. And it would be there may be some insulin resistance develop after years of being a type 1 diabetic. Because I know that because I have a physician friend who found that working on insulin resistance after 30 years of being type 1 diabetic actually lowered the amount of insulin he needed. But and we also see in the steak and butter gang, we have a long-term type 1 diabetic who's been carnivore over 7 years, and she takes less insulin today than she did when she first started. So we know there's a little bit of insulin resistance over years of diabetes and giving yourself injections, but that's not the core problem. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you.
Thank you, Phil. Let's do another one. Are there special considerations for people with Ehlers-Danlos and MTHFR?
Yeah, basically, we see that those conditions get better when you're on carnivore. And Ehlers-Danlos is a collagen issue, and I've seen dozens of carnivores go carnivore because of Ehlers-Danlos and have a decrease in problems. We even had one person who had a growing aneurysm of her abdominal aorta that she said the doctor said it was actually getting smaller after going carnivore. So that is like crazy, because if you'd told me that when I was practicing medicine and didn't know about carnivore, I wouldn't have believed that. But we've seen it. So, and there's no really special considerations when you have either of these. Okay.
Perfect. Phil, can you talk about coffee? Does it matter what time you drink coffee, specifically when it relates to energy?
So I don't see coffee as, I don't want you to use coffee as an energy source. I want you to use coffee because it's a part of your life that makes a difference. And when we're addressing insulin resistance, we have a time where we don't want you to start your day with coffee. And then once you get the insulin resistance under control, there's actually a time and place for coffee when you're not eating, during those hours of the day that you're not eating. So I'll talk about that a little when I get to my N=1 experiment, because I actually tested that out in the last 2 weeks to see what happened to me. So I think it'll be interesting. But if you're new to carnivore, the best thing to remember is don't start your day with coffee. Eat something first, get your protein and your fat in, and then top it off with the coffee. Don't start there. So
Perfect.
I would like to get to our mitochondria if she's able to get those up.
Yes, Phil. Lindy, did you need more time or we're good? Perfect.
Okay, so advance the slide and I'll tell you when to advance.
All right, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, great. So what the mitochondria, their main function is to generate energy, and the energy that is called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And if you look at the structure of the mitochondria, these are organelles. So every cell has a cell membrane, has cytoplasm, has a nucleus where our DNA lives, our 23 pairs of chromosome that encodes over 62,000 genes. And when you look at the mitochondria, there are literally dozens to thousands of mitochondria in almost every cell of the body, except for mature red blood cells. They don't have mitochondria because they're not generating power. They're just carrying oxygen around to your tissues. So each mitochondria contains its own DNA, and it's actually circular DNA. And where the DNA in your cell comes from your mom, half from your mom, half from your dad, your DNA in your mitochondria actually comes from your mother. And so if you have low energy, I'm just telling you, you can blame that on mom instead of blaming it on dad. So dads, there's something we don't have to be blamed for anymore. Um, but the neat thing about the DNA in the mitochondria, the mitochondria has everything it needs to replicate and build itself so that you can actually replicate mitochondria in your own cells. And that DNA creates duplicates, will create all the proteins and enzymes that those mitochondria need to go through all the chemical processes, what we call the biochemistry of the mitochondria. And it will, everything it needs is self contained in the mitochondria. And you'll notice it's unique DNA with the blue thing. It's actually this picture is not right. It's actually circular DNA, not a double helix, like our main DNA in our cell. There's two membranes. The yellow arrow points to the outer. That's what defines where the mitochondria begins and ends. And the inner membrane are lots of folds, and they're called cristae. And you notice how they fold over and create a lot of surface area. And then there's a matrix, and that matrix is what contains all the chemical reactions that are in that mitochondria. So let's go to the next slide. Um, Thanks. So if you look at the different cells of our body, and again, AI doesn't always get things right. Mitochondria are not on the outside of the cell, they're on the inside of the cell. But this is to depict that you have different numbers of mitochondria in different cells of your body. So notice how you have mitochondria in your muscle cells, you have mitochondria in your liver, you have mitochondria in your kidney and in your brain, and your heart muscle actually has the most mitochondria of anything, with over 5,000 mitochondria for every muscle cell in your heart. I mean, think about that. These things are so small that one muscle fiber can have 5,000 mitochondria. And the neat thing about these is they will increase in number and activity as needed. So when we talk about people with slow metabolism, or you've wrecked your metabolism after fasting for a long period of time or eating OMADs for a long time as carnivores. We talk about that slows your metabolism. Well, what you're actually doing is you're killing off mitochondria. Your mitochondria are saying, I'm not getting enough to eat. So they start de-evolving and aging, and they start breaking down. And literally, you have nothing to stimulate building new mitochondria. So they just start shutting down one by one and literally turn their lights off because they're not needed. And this is why you don't have that energy and you think you need that coffee, is because you're shutting your mitochondria down. And I think that's fascinating. So let's go to the next slide. So the mitochondria take two different fuel sources, and it can only take one at a time. So it can only consume glucose or it can consume ketones. And when we're eating carbohydrates and we're living on glucose as our fuel source, you'll notice the process is called cellular respiration, because you notice I've got a little oxygen going into the mitochondria and carbon dioxide and CO2 and water coming out. So that's the same process that happens in your lungs that we call respiration, breathing in, breathing out, taking in oxygen, breathing out carbon dioxide, like every animal, every human and animal does. Well, the process of breaking down glucose, we can break glucose and generate two molecules of ATP. But when we add oxygen to that breakdown, we get into the mitochondria and start generating 30 of those ATPs for every glucose molecule. So when we add oxygen to the fuel, it burns quicker and is more efficient. So think about a campfire or a furnace. If you want it to burn faster and better, you open the flue and put more oxygen in it, and it literally burns hotter, faster, better. Now, the ketones, when they come in, they can't break down without oxygen, so they need oxygen, and they go in, and every molecule of a ketone body breaks down into energy, but a little less energy. But if we look at triglycerides, which are where we get our ketone bodies from, we take a molecule of triglyceride that we either get from our diet or we break down from stored fat. It goes to the liver. The liver, if in the lack of no sugar, will say, let's convert this triglyceride into ketones. It actually creates three ketones for every molecule of triglyceride. So you actually get about 260% more energy per triglyceride molecule than you get from every glucose molecule. And glucose, when it burns, it gives off a lot of heat and gives off light. So literally, your mitochondria light up when they're producing energy. But unfortunately, it's not a clean burning fuel, and it sets off what we call oxidative processes as a byproduct. And so you actually um, get the what we call the free radicals leaking out of damaged mitochondria if you all you ever do is feed them glucose or carbohydrates. But when you feed them ketones, um, more of that ketone is used for energy, and you give off less heat. And I noticed one of the first things I felt when I was fat adapted after going from the standard American diet and going carnivore. One thing I noticed was I seemed to be a little cooler. I did not generate as much heat. And that's because the ketones are burning and creating more fuel and not throwing off so much heat. So I'm not cooking my mitochondria when I'm using ketones for fuel like I am and creating damaging oxidation when I'm using glucose as a fuel. So the ketones burn cleaner, and they also stimulate the mitochondria because the mitochondria likes ketones so much that when you raise those ketones as the fuel, you actually begin to stimulate the production of more mitochondria. So they begin to ramp up. And so the glucose is damaging our mitochondria, where the ketones are actually ramping up our mitochondria. So let's go to the next slide. So if you think about mitochondria, we call them the power plant of your cell. So think about a power plant. We basically take coal or oil or natural gas, and we feed it into the furnace that burns those things, and it generates electricity that in that case is generated as electrons through power lines, and they fuel our houses and keep our lights on. Well, the mitochondria are actually the power plants. They take either glucose or ketones and convert it into a chemical energy called ATP. And that ATP is used molecule by molecule to do things like make muscles contract and synthesize proteins and make all of our cellular and create new DNA and reproduce. All that stuff is driven by ATP. So, and I showed in here that the mitochondria actually generates light when it's healthy and generating a lot of energy. So just like if an atomic bomb goes off, they always talk about a big flash of light. Well, submicroscopically, your mitochondria are actually generating light. So I like to say the mitochondria is what keeps your body cells on. And when they go dark, that's when you start losing energy, losing mitochondria, and breaking down your body and suffering the process. So let's go to the next slide. So beyond the energy production, the mitochondria regulate our cellular metabolism, which eventually determines our metabolism of our entire body. And it allows signaling between these mitochondria to say, make more. And it also controls the life and death of the cell in which the mitochondria live. And I think most people know there's a process that when you fast, you start breaking down damaged cells through a process of autophagy, Well, you also have the process of mitophagy, which is breaking down of the mitochondria and replacing them with newer, healthier ones. But the mitochondria have a big role in the ability for the autophagy to occur. So all this protein synthesis and everything is coming from this ATP that only comes from the mitochondria. So let's go to the next slide. So optimal mitochondrial function then is essential for maintaining our energy balance, our metabolic health, and our cellular resilience, because with poor mitochondria, we're more susceptible to disease. And so these healthy mitochondria, they support our muscle strength, our cognitive function, how we think, and even control our immune function, because our white cells can't live without healthy and do what they need to do unless your mitochondria are healthy. So lifestyle factors like our nutrition, regular exercise, and avoiding toxic substances, they all enhance these mitochondrial growth of new ones and the health of them. And recent studies link improved mitochondrial health to longevity and reduce risk of chronic diseases. So let's go to the next slide. So when they don't work well, we have insufficient energy production and excess free radicals, which are what age our cells and damage our cells and cause cells to die. And when the cells begin to die, the tissues that they're in, whether it be your heart, your liver, your kidney, they begin to get your brain, begin to get damaged too. So this leads to fatigue, muscle weakness, neurodegeneration, and these metabolic disorders that many suffer from. So dysfunctional mitochondria are really probably the central microbiochemical process going in your body that really ages you and contributes to chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, Parkinsonism, Alzheimer's, and a slew of other things. Next slide. So I made a little cartoon showing what happens when the mitochondria gets sick because of our high carbohydrate diet, when we don't feed them ketones and we start to get inflammation in the mitochondria. So notice that the healthy mitochondria on the left, it's got light in it. It's very light, lots of folds. And the one on the right kind of looks like a shriveled up old raisin. It's smaller, it's shriveled, there's no light in it. It's gone dark. The less folds, which means less surface area, and they decrease in numbers. And thus you have less energy production, and eventually it's lights out for your mitochondria. And if it's lights out for your mitochondria, it eventually can be lights out for you. So just keep it on this. Let's go to the next slide. And so what causes this damage to mitochondria? So I got a list here just so you can see it while I talk through it, but chronic inflammation is a big part of this. Insulin resistance is a big contributor to chronic inflammation. Oxidative stress that can be due to environmental toxins or things in your environment that's doing it, nutritional deficiencies, inflammatory foods like seed oils and ultra-processed foods, couch potatoes, sedentary lifestyles. Aging itself can cause you to lose mitochondria, and it disruptions of our circadian rhythm like poor sleep. So if you have fatigue, metabolic disease, and neurodegeneration, be thinking, I wonder if my mitochondria are playing a role in this. So as we go to the next slide, so what's this mean to you? Well, if your mitochondria are dying off and they're becoming less functional, you're going to have, and go ahead and go to the next slide, Lindy. Yeah, you're going to have low energy, you're going to feel fatigue, brain fog, muscle weakness, you're not going to be able to exercise well. You start seeing insulin resistance, accelerated aging, and increased inflammatory conditions like autoimmune diseases. And just hop down to the next slide. And so what do we do about this? So here's the things that have actually been proven scientifically that help to get you better with your mitochondria. So because sedentary lifestyle is such a big thing, movement is helpful. You don't have to go to strenuous exercise, 7,000 steps a day. is a great target for people to start. If you can't do 7,000, do 500. Start somewhere. But when you get beyond 7,000 steps a day, you've passed peak performance and you're doing the exercise for something beyond your mitochondria. Sometimes we do more rigorous exercise because of what it does for our brain and the endorphins and things. But 7,000 steps a day will help your mitochondria. Adequate sleep, restore your circadian rhythm by not only your sleep, but getting morning sunlight and grounding, which we talk about a lot, reduction of stress, being in a community of people where you feel like you've got friends and chums who understand what you're going through, who will support you and keep you accountable, will actually help you. Avoiding environmental toxins, pesticides, for instance, and a lot of chemicals can be damaging. Eating your nutrient-dense carnivore diet and avoid those ultra-processed foods and seed oils. And remember, this is why you want to eat high-fat carnivore and not low-fat carnivore. There is something in your mitochondria that we call the Randle cycle. And what it is, it has to do with the fact that your mitochondria can perform on glucose or it can perform on ketone. But they can't do, a mitochondria cannot process both of those fuels at the same time. So, like a hybrid vehicle, or unlike a hybrid vehicle can use electricity and gasoline at the same time. Your mitochondria is not a hybrid vehicle, is a one fuel uh, organelle. So it either processes glucose or it will process ketones. And if you give it a lot of glucose, you shut off the benefits of ketone as a fuel, and you'll start to get this oxidative stress and aging and decrease in numbers. If you increase the ketones that the mitochondria have available, you are increasing the efficiency of the burn, generating less heat, less damage, less oxidative stress, and you're inhibiting the glucose uptake. So that is why, what's the source of those ketones? Well, they're triglycerides. Where are they coming from? The fatty foods that you eat and what's stored. And if you have a lot of insulin resistance, it's hard to release those ketones. So we got to get people with insulin resistance to get them their insulin more sensitive so they can start increasing those ketones and start burning that as a fuel rather than the glucose. But if you're mixing glucose and you're saying, oh, I'm going to have, my frosted flakes in the morning and go carnivore the rest of the day, you are literally shutting down your mitochondria to process carbohydrates for hours, and you're hurting yourself because your mitochondria aren't going to get fully healed. And I want to go to the final slide, Lindy, just to show you what happens, or the one before that, I'm sorry, and I'm going to skip the final slide. So this is a slide, and I've used this for a while in the insulin resistance intensive. And it basically at the top, this was done in rats that they made insulin resistant, and they fed them very high carbohydrate keto rat chow. And so that would be like feeding you kibble, so to speak. And you see the muscle cell in red, kind of looks like a snow cone turned on or ice cream cone turned on the side. And then you see these mitochondria, and you see lots of mitochondria, but they're kind of shriveled up and they're not very well defined. And that's the blue circle. And then what they did was for 6 weeks, they took away the rat chow and gave them a extremely basically minimal carbohydrate, mainly fat and protein diet for just 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Now, in the life cycle of a rat, that's a long time. But in 6 weeks, they biopsied their hearts, and look at what happened at the bottom picture. See how the much more distinct the muscle cells look, and look at those mitochondria. They're big, they're plump. You see a lot of folds in them. You just see dozens and dozens, hundreds of them. just packing those muscle fibers. So your heart muscle is actually reproducing, packing the muscles with more mitochondria, which means more energy. And this is happening in your brain, it's happening in your liver, it's happening in your skeletal muscle. And that's why the fatigue goes away. But this is what happens when you take away insulin resistance and feed your mitochondria ketones. So let's stop sharing at this point. And Bella, does this make sense to you before I show you my n equals 1?
I think we should ask the audience that because this presentation is for the community. So, did you guys understand those slides? Was it helpful? Was it advanced? And you want it to be broken down more? Let us know. Give us your feedback in the live chat. And just a heads up, Phil, we do have our non-scale victory party in 15 minutes. So, how
Yep.
would you like to do the rest of this live stream? Questions or n equals 1?
Well, why don't we do the questions, and maybe at a future time we can do the n equals 1, because I'm going to show you a strategy to actually increase your mitochondria. So that should be a pretty good teaser for people to stay tuned.
Beautiful. I have our first question on the chat here. So Marilyn says, I've been carnivore for 4 months now, and my fasting glucose is still 110. How should I lower it?
Well, this is why we've created the insulin intensive, because we have many people that just can't break the fasting blood sugar and get it down under 100, which is where we want it. I was able to do that in 4 months, just following it. But then I had a relapse when I did a trial in n equals 1 of using a statin to see if it could dissolve a 70% lesion in one of my heart arteries. And 4 months into it, my insulin resistance came back, and I jumped up 26 pounds and had to deal with it just like you're dealing with insulin resistance. So the question is, can I reverse it, and what do I need to do? So if you come into SBG, the first thing we do is Coach Raymond has produced a program that's really centers on first priming. Priming is actually to get 2 hormones regulated, that if you don't get those 2 hormones fixed, it's going to take you a long time to reduce insulin resistance. So ghrelin is what makes your stomach growl. Leptin is what makes you feel lazy. It's the satiety hormone. And so what he does is we have you eat 3 meals a day, as long as it takes until we call it your appetite opens up. Your appetite opens up means all of us, when you first start eating 3 meals a day, if you've been carnivore for a period of time and you've been under eating, doing fasting, or doing 1 meal a day, you tend to have shut down your ghrelin and over-regulated your leptin. So you've got, with high leptin, you cannot get that insulin resistance improved, because leptin with insulin causes you to retain fat and build fat, and you've got to get those two. But you've got to fix the ghrelin first, or the leptin won't fix. So you eat 3 meals a day, and you eat 3 meals a day, and you eat 3 meals a day, and at some point something happens that we call your appetite opens up, and you get extremely hungry, and you just want to start eating. And those 3 meals, you look forward to it. You just want to eat, and you just keep eating and eating and eating. 3 meals, you have no struggles eating 3 meals, where when you first started, the thought of 2 meals a day made you nauseated, or you ate your first meal and you weren't hungry the rest of the day. You want to get to the point where you're 3 meals a day and you're craving more, and you're just eating and eating. And Bella, I think you did that for about 5 months, right?
I did, about half a year.
So yeah, so it took you about 5 months to get your ghrelin keyed up. But when your appetite is open, but you have this ravenous hunger, your body is saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. And at some point, that leptin will start to re-regulate in that environment of good nutrition, eating what your body says you need. And the leptin will start getting back into the sweet spot where it belongs. And you'll start saying, oh, I can't eat another bite. and that's called your appetite closing down. Okay. And that's the only clue you have that your leptin now is regulated in addition to your ghrelin. And you can't do those backwards. You can't fix your leptin if your ghrelin's not working. Because if you have insulin resistance, you are going to be at standstill because your body's going to want to retain fat. It's going to build new fat. It's going to keep your blood sugars high, and your insulin's going to be your tripping point. So you got to tackle ghrelin and leptin first. So then once you've done that, then we do something called time restricted eating, which is we take you into only eating food during a certain time of the day from this hour to this hour. And then you don't eat at all for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours. We build that up. And during those hours that you're not eating, you're not releasing as much insulin. And that begins to allow your body to start making less insulin and throwing less insulin, which is fueling the fire, the inflammation in your body. So, but people get this backwards and they think they're going to fix inflammation, and they're so afraid that if they do priming, they're going to overeat, they're going to gain weight, and you may gain some weight. But if you don't get that ghrelin and leptin right first, it is 10 times more difficult to get insulin resistance. And if you just follow the sequence and go through the challenges we do, and we don't do them by the calendar because every individual is different. And in the intensive, we work with you individually. And I did this with a group of people over the last few months. And what I found was there is a goal achievement that people need to do to know when to take the next step in their insulin resistance journey. And it's hard for people to figure that out, but in a community, it's an opportunity to say to other people, you're at the point now you need to do that. And some people are resistant. Some people think, oh, I want this to be over on March 24th. And so that's my timetable. No, you got to change your attitude. It's however long it's going to take for your body to get it back into things. So you'll get your blood sugar down if you follow a plan to get your blood sugar down. And a lot of people do it on carnivore alone, but I've been in the carnivore community for almost 2.5 years, and I've seen a lot of people successful just following Coach Raymond's 90-day challenge plan and just continue doing that. But people with a lot of insulin resistance often find they need more. And everyone's individual, and you can't just say, this next 30 days, everyone does this and they're going to be fixed. It doesn't work that way. We have different times we've been insulin resistant. We have different biology. We have different metabolism. We have different numbers of mitochondria. And we have to start with where we're at and work from there.
Thank you, Phil. I'm going to do this question just because a lot of people want it answered. Let me put it up on the screen. So as you were going through your slides, Phil, some people are just wondering, so does this mean we need to be eating high fat for healthier mitochondria? Could you explain further?
Yeah. So when you're mixing things in your diet, so carbs, proteins, and fats, you're sending a mixed message to your mitochondria, and your mitochondria love to burn glucose because it can even burn glucose without a little bit of oxygen. It doesn't create much energy, just a fraction of the energy when you don't have oxygen. But when you start increasing the fat and you are trying to move your body into more ketosis. And as you get ketosis, now remember, ketones are a byproduct of the fatty acids from triglycerides that you eat and triglycerides you break down from your fat. They get processed only by the liver to create ketone bodies. So you have to give it enough fat to start ramping up that ketone production in your liver, and so that the mitochondria is presenting with an ever increasing amount of ketones while you're decreasing the amount of glucose that you're giving them. And this whole movement of adding um, carbs into your diet when you're a carnivore or eating low fat carnivore makes no physiologic sense to me as someone with a master's in physiology and someone that's watched, over the last 2.5 years, watch people in carnivore. It because glucose and ketones are competing fuels for the mitochondria, and if you start giving ketones or cutting back on the fat, you're going to move your body to preferably want to go the glucose metabolism path, which is continuing the damage to your mitochondria. So let's get our mitochondria healthy. It raises your metabolism, it raises the burning of fat in your body, and it gives you more energy. It's better for your nervous system, and it's just healthier. And remember, damaged mitochondria, Dr. Thomas Seifert says he's never seen a malignancy that didn't have damaged mitochondria in the cells. So keep that in mind too.
And just a heads up on time, Phil, would you like to reveal your tips that you were saving until the end now?
Well, I wanted to say, and we don't talk much about specifically measuring ketones in the carnivore community. We don't talk a lot about it because it's really a tool that a lot of people going straight keto do. And in fact, when you are carnivore, we really don't care what your ketones are doing if you're doing well, because the fact that you're doing well in healing tells me you're making enough ketones to fuel your mitochondria, because you wouldn't feel so good and you wouldn't heal so much if you didn't have good mitochondria to begin with. But I wanted to actually start this year and measure my ketones and actually see what happens. So let's see if I can share this with you all. So hopefully you're seeing a screen.
Now we are, yes. Let me add it to the stage, Lindy. I'll do it. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Great. So we're looking at, since New Year's Eve, I started using a Keto Mojo device, checking my blood sugars. And remember, I'm someone who deals with insulin resistance, but I'm actually doing pretty well. And I wanted to see how much effort it would take for me to get ketotic. Now, this blue line down here is actually measuring my ketones in millimeters per liter. And I'm in the US, so I'm measuring glucose in milligrams per deciliter. So two different units of measure. But Dr. Annette Bosworth has created an index called the Dr. Bos ratio, where you divide the glucose in energy units in milligrams per deciliter by the ketones, and you get what she calls a Dr. Bos ratio, which is really a glucose ketone ratio. But all the scientific literature is developed on a glucose ketone index, where they put the glucose in international units, but we don't use those or do our readings in the United States. So if you are international, the GKI is the equivalent to what I'm going to show you. But you'll see that my fasting blood sugars, and some of these are fasting, and some when I first awoke, and some are right before I start eating my first meal a day. And I do intermittent time-restricted eating. So this 18-6 means this is right before, on the 5th. I did one when I woke up at 5 and at 5:30, and then didn't check this again until I had completed 18 hours of not eating. And notice that my blood sugar is borderline high at 94 when I first get up. That's when my cortisol is the highest. But by the time I waited 18 hours from my previous meal, my blood sugar has literally dropping down. And that's this one right here, from 94 to 79. So that tells me I've got my liver cleaned out of that excess sugar. So to use the example of the question, you got a blood sugar of 110, measure it after you've not eaten for 18 hours and see where your blood sugar is right before you eat. Now, if the blood sugar is not coming down, that means you've got insulin resistance. We got to work a little harder. But what I'm doing is I cut down my insulin because I'm getting farther and farther away from my meals. And then I eat 2 meals within a 6-hour window. And then the next morning I wake up, my blood sugar is back to 91. Now I'm about 12 hours. No, I'm about 14 hours after I ate. And then I just go through these. So then I tried an OMAD, which is eating 1 meal, which means I'm not eating for 23 hours and eating during 1 hour. And notice what happened to me. All of a sudden, I went from very low ketones. Notice that they did come up with my time restricted eating when I measured them right before I ate. And what a normal ketone level, anything less than 0.4 means you're not producing many ketones. But when you get up to 0.8 and over 1, you're starting to produce ketones and you're moving into what we call ketone adapted, or we're feeding our mitochondria ketones. But look what happened when I started doing an OMAD, and my OMAD drove my blood sugar up to 3.2. So I literally went up 800% from 0.4 to 3.2. And what happens intracellular when I do that, those ketones are going to shut off the glucose fueling of my mitochondria and start my mitochondria to say, we need more mitochondria. We can't handle these many ketones. So let's start replicating our mitochondria. Now, if I did an OMAD and my ketones have stayed in the basement and they're not increasing, I'm not ready to do an OMAD because my body says I'm not keto adapted yet. I need to do some more healing. So you stay in the 2 MADs. But what happens is people go to OMAD too quickly and they don't know if it's effective. But when you measure, and I'm not recommending everyone measure ketones and glucose, but I'm saying if you have insulin resistance, you can find out how your body responds to different stimulants. And my ketones were so high that I couldn't quit talking. I had so much energy. So I decided after my OMAD that I'm just going to turn this into a 72-hour fast, which I do every quarter. Now, if my ketones were down here, I should never, ever do a 72-hour fast because my energy is not based on ketones, it's based on sugar. And where am I going to get that sugar? Because I'm not eating it, I'm going to start breaking down muscle tissue, feeding it to the liver to do gluconeogenesis and make glucose. But I was really accelerating my ketones. And you'll see that right before I ate, at the end of my 72-hour fast, my ketones were all the way up to 6.2. So that is like, now I need about 1,000% more mitochondria, 1,500% more mitochondria than I needed when I was down here. Okay, so let's stop sharing and pop off.
Awesome. So in these last 2 minutes, Phil, what are your final words? We do need to head over to NSV.
Well, we think a lot of people will resolve insulin resistance just going on a carnivore diet, especially if you're following the 90-day challenge. But if you've been stuck for a while, your body's hanging on the fat, it's hanging on to high fasting sugars, perhaps our insulin resistance intensive may be what you're looking for. And we hope to have dozens of people in this next group and really work. We're going to teach you all about the physiology of the body and there's about 26 hormones that we want to get re-regulated. I noticed we're not using any kind of peptide injections or anything like that because those are artificial means which actually slow your hormonal healing, and we want to get you hormonally healed, get your mitochondria stimulated, and get you fit but teach you how to manage insulin resistance for the rest of your life. So if you're interested, Lindy, do you have a thing for the if they're interested in the insulin
Yep.
intensive, a slide for there, and it'll be in the show notes. Just go, you can find out more about it, and it's a 17-week intensive course where you have a lot to digest in pre-recorded lessons. And then once a week, we get together live, answer your questions. You fill out a journal. You actually will track for a couple weeks your macros, so we see where you're starting. And we're going to help you problem shoot. And there's a couple of videos here. How do I know if I have insulin resistance? And that will help you to make a decision if this is something you should do. So I hope that's helpful for people, and hope to talk about this more in the future.
Absolutely. I would love to invite you back, Phil, for more live streams to discuss this topic. I see that the chat, you guys all loved it. You enjoyed this great information. A lot of you guys are in the Steak and Butter Gang 90-day challenge. Our NSV party is starting in literally 2 minutes. So head on over to the Zoom call. We are giving away 2 air fryers and 2 boxes of carnivore bars. We'll see you over there. Thank you guys for joining us.